Welcome back to the channel. My name is Carolyn. If you're new here, welcome. I had gastric bypass surgery back in 2020, almost 5 years ago. I was able to lose 170 pounds, and then in September of 2022, I started a GLP-1 Mounjaro Zepbound, and I've been on that ever since, and I've lost an additional 60 pounds for a total loss of 230 pounds. I started at 401.6 pounds, and today I'm around like 170, 175, depending on where I am in my cycle, which brings me to the topic of today's video. I get asked questions all the time over on my Instagram, how I track my cycle, why I track my cycle, what app I use, how I figured out how to do all of this and learned all of this. So I really wanted to make a long form video all about it to just kind of share my knowledge and share my understanding, and yeah, hope that it is helpful to you. If you like this video, please check out my other videos on my channel. I have documented a lot of my journey on there, and if you're interested, I also document daily on my Instagram, so I will leave the link to that down below. That's where you'll find me. TikTok was banned today, so I don't have TikTok. But yeah, you can find me on Instagram if you're interested in seeing more like day-to-day content. I've also been posting some of my shorts or some of my short form content over here on Shorts. So yeah, check out my channel. I have a lot of information on there, and yeah. Thank you so much for being here, and subscribe. I feel like I should start at the beginning of when I started tracking. I started tracking my cycle back in 2020 when I had gastric bypass surgery. Up until that point, I had never been on any birth control. I wasn't asked to go on any birth control when I had surgery. I was single at the time. So I started using the Clue app, and I'm gonna pull it up here. I just use the free version. I have used the free version, but this is what it looks like. This is like my cycle. So I'm currently in the luteal phase. Yeah, I've been using this app for a very, very long time. And I usually use it to put in like my period. So you can track your period, your ovulation. You can put in symptoms and stuff like that. I've really enjoyed this app. I know a lot of people use Natural Cycles with their Aura Ring, and there are some other apps out there. But I think the best thing to do is just find an app that is gonna work for you, maybe test some out and things like that. I think an important distinction is that I was not on birth control at the time, and I just started tracking my period. So I really wasn't even like looking at all the phases of the menstrual cycle. I was literally just tracking, when am I getting my period, how long is it lasting, and when is it stopping? That's it. In 2021, I met my now husband. I was not on birth control. We were using condoms in the beginning. Realized I should probably get on birth control. So I decided to get on a hormonal IUD. I got the Skyla, which was like the lowest dose of progesterone or something like that. It was only supposed to be in for 3 years. I had that in for a year. I had it taken out in 2022. I hated it. I'm gonna be very, very honest. Like, I suffered with a lot of hormonal acne. I really feel like having the IUD placed halted my weight loss progress. That was right around the time where I entered my really long stall, and it became like nearly impossible for me to lose weight, and I just didn't feel good. I had like mood swings. I just felt all over the place, and which is crazy because I know so many people who love their IUD. And I really wanted to love it because, like, you know, it was an easy form of birth control. I will say it was incredibly painful having it inserted, and I didn't love the women's practice that I went to. Like, the provider was not great, and I inevitably ended up having it removed. And when we had it removed, that's when I realized, like, okay, I don't want to be on traditional forms of birth control, hormonal, non-hormonal. I was scared to do the copper IUD because of the side effects with like a heavy period, painful periods, things like that, because in my teen years, I had very, very painful, heavy periods. So I started doing a lot of research into just tracking on my own, and I had watched videos on the fertility awareness method back in like my early 20s. So I just decided that like that's what I was going to do. We were going to be much more careful with our sexy time, and there's really only like a 5-day span in the month where you are more like, that's the time you're most susceptible to getting pregnant, your ovulation window. So during that time, I would track that, and we would just use condoms at that time. So it's a lot of information. But yeah, we would just, obviously we are not trying to get pregnant, so we've been doing that for the last 2 years. Or if we didn't use condoms, we would just like abstain from having sex during that ovulation window. But for me, it started with the first day of your cycle is the first day of your period. So that for me typically lasts 3 to 5 days. And then day 14 is your ovulation day, typically. All of this is as like a typical person experiencing their menstrual cycle. Like if you're on birth control, if you have abnormal periods, irregular periods or things like that, this probably will not work for you. This is for a woman who has regular trackable periods, kind of doesn't have any abnormalities, like probably doesn't have PCOS or endometriosis or anything like that. So take that for what it is. In a high level, your menstrual cycle is 2 phases, your follicular phase and your luteal phase, and then your ovulation day. But if you break it down further, within your follicular phase, you have 2 phases. So you have the beginning of the follicular phase, which is your menses, your menstrual, your active period, which lasts anywhere from 3 to 7 days, sometimes longer, just depends on the person. And then the remaining days before you hit ovulation, which ovulation is typically day 14, that is the remainder of your follicular phase. In my opinion, those are the best days of your entire menstrual cycle. And then you have ovulation, which your egg is released on one day. But there's usually like an ovulation window. So there's typically 4 or 5 days before your ovulation day where it's typically not safe to have unprotected sex. And then a day or 2 after your ovulation day where it's typically not safe to have sex. So a window of like 5 to 7 days in the middle of your menstrual cycle where if you're not trying to get pregnant, don't have sex. And then after your ovulation window is the luteal phase, Luteal, luteal. So you have, this is where progesterone is building up and basically your walls of your uterus are building up to either prepare for fertilization or prepare for shedding, i.e. your period. The luteal phase for a lot of women is the worst, in my opinion. It is the worst. It's where you experience the most cravings. It's where you're either going to experience your PMSing symptoms, and it's just overall you have pretty low energy. Your follicular and ovulation windows is probably when you feel the best. You have more energy, you feel more strong. A lot of people, if they're going for some kind of PR, whether it's in like running or weightlifting or anything like that, they typically try to line it up to their ovulation day because that's when you are physically the strongest. I'm looking at on my phone, but I'll throw it up on the screen, and these are the menstrual cycle phases and how the different hormones in our body are flowing throughout the entire cycle. So early follicular phase, which is your menstruation, your FSH, your LH, your estrogen, your progesterone are very low. Your estrogen is slightly rising a little bit, but your progesterone stays low until you hit your ovulation, and that's when it starts to rise. And progesterone is linked to lots of cravings and feeling more tired. And then your estrogen hits its peak during the late follicular ovulation window, and then that starts to decline through the luteal phase. And your progesterone has a really high spike during your luteal phase, and then everything starts to drop again as you head into menstruation. I really find a graph like this super helpful in understanding and pinpointing symptoms and patterns throughout my menstrual cycle. And that's really why I choose to track, is so that I can understand my body better. So I know that when I'm about to get my period, I'm going to be feeling a little bit more cramping and just sort of my body preparing for shedding the uterine lining. I know that the follicular phase is when I feel my best. It's usually when I weigh in at my lowest. And then during the luteal phase is when I typically see the scale creep up a couple pounds. I'm holding on to more water. I'm feeling more bloated, lethargic. Sometimes I experience a little bit of constipation. I have more cravings, just things like that. And so as you become more in tune with your body and understanding these phases, I feel like you can prepare yourself for these things on a monthly basis. And so you're not totally like coming up on things unexpected. Like I follow some people that are like, you know, they'll say, oh, well, my period showed up today, and so I guess that's why I was feeling cranky and craving all of the things, and the scale was up. And it's like, yeah, if you were tracking that, you would probably anticipate that and be able to regulate your emotions accordingly. For me, like I know during the luteal phase and during my period is where I like am up a few pounds on the scale. Like I just know that. And so seeing that doesn't bother me in an emotional, detrimental way. And then I know that during the follicular phase, the tail end of it is where I'm gonna be weighing my lowest and I'm gonna be feeling my best, and I can prepare and be excited about that and enjoy it the most. So this is a way of tracking for me that obviously is preventing pregnancy, but it's also allowing me to better regulate myself emotionally. How do you know that you're ovulating? Great question. A lot of people will use, for example, I talked about the Oura rings with Natural Cycles. It tracks basal temperature. If you're going to track using basal temperature, like I know there's something called Daisy where you take your temperature every day. You have to be doing that every day, every morning at the same time every day for it to be an accurate representation. And through my reading and like understanding of like basal temperature, it's not the best way to be tracking when you're ovulating. During ovulation, your basal temperature rises. And so that's how people like know that they're ovulating. I find the best way to track ovulation is your cervical mucus. So a lot of women get discharge, and that discharge can tell you something. You can have different kinds of discharge. So usually during the tail end of your follicular phase, you're going to be experiencing more discharge. You're gonna feel a little juicy. That's just how I like to describe it. I just feel a little extra juicy down there, you know, which is great if you're having sex. And so when I start to notice that discharge, that's when I know, okay, my ovulation window has started. That's when like we refrain from having sex, or we're using condoms. So cervical mucus is the best way. You can also use ovulation strips. I have done that sort of when I was first starting to track my ovulation window. I will throw a picture up here on the screen. When you're not ovulating, you're typically dry or it's like sticky. Ovulation is close when it's like wet and watery. And then ovulation is coming up, it's when it's like creamy. And then ovulation, when you're like on the day, it's going to be very wet, stretchy, and resembles kind of like a raw egg white. So I'll throw this up on the screen. I'll also link some resources down below. This kind of like tracking your cervical mucus, you kind of have to get really familiar with your own body fluids. And it's not a bad thing. I definitely recommend it because it's probably the best way to be tracking when you're ovulating if you're trying to prevent pregnancy or whether you're trying to conceive. And definitely do not rely on apps to tell you when you're ovulating. So in the Clue app, it will tell you, it'll have the blue days where, oh, like here you're ovulating, or like these are unsafe days. It's not going to be accurate unless you're inputting data in here of like using your ovulation strips or testing your cervical mucus, then yes. But if you're just solely relying, if you're just putting in your period days in here and then it'll automatically generate like, okay, here's your anticipated ovulation time. Like, do not trust this. Do not trust this. You need to be tracking your cervical mucus, your basal temp, or using your ovulation strips to really be sure that you are in your ovulation window. Otherwise, you could end up pregnant. That is what I do. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Like I said, I will link some resources down below. I can't say enough amazing things about tracking my period. I think it is, or tracking my menstrual cycle, I should say. It's one of the best things I've ever done for myself because it has allowed me to understand my body in a way that I've never understood it before. And so many things that they just don't teach you, like growing up and the different phases and understanding how the hormones work and affect you. My Roman Empire is how my menstrual cycle affects everything. You're on a 28-day hormone cycle, whereas like for men, they're on a 24-hour hormone cycle. So the women bear the brunt of everything. But let me know if you have any questions. I think I went over everything, but if I didn't, let me know if you have any other questions and I'll try to address them in the comments and maybe I'll make a follow-up video to this. But that is the gist of how and why I track my menstrual cycle. I hope this video was helpful. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching and I will see you in the next one. Bye.